The movie opens with a true story of a mentally ill woman named Sabina who was confined by two guys inside a carriage on their way to Bergdahl's clinic. Inside the clinic, Carl Jung, a doctor, meets Sabina, his newest case, to diagnose her problem. She describes it as humiliation. It makes her dizzy and causes her to break out in cold sweat. Her father was often upset with her, and she claimed that a vision appeared in her thoughts. Carl is checking Carl's house from the inside. Carl is discussing Sabina's condition with his wife Emma, who says she is well educated and aspires to be a doctor too. Then they discuss Professor Freud's theory of psychoanalysis without going into detail about how it's done outside of the clinic. Carl and Sabine go for a stroll through the gardens. She claims that she knows her mother does not love her father because of the noises in her head. They also informed her she would never be a doctor, and Carl says he has to go for 2 weeks to serve in the military. Sabina becomes enraged. She informs him she is spending her time and throws down her coat. Carl picks it up and tries to clean it with a stick. Sabina screams at him to stop and to bring her back into Sabina's room. Sabine is playing with her meal when the nurse steps and she proceeds to inform Professor Bleuler. Then they go to her room and find her missing. She's outside in the pond splashing around. A pair of nurses sees her and pull her to the bathroom inside Sabine's room to give her a bath. Carl enlists Sabine's assistance in his psychoanalysis studies. He forces Emma to take part in the study. Carl inquires of Sabine about her thoughts about Emma. She expresses her concern about her baby and his loss of faith in Emma. Carl returns home to see that Emma has given birth to a baby girl who is being fed by a nanny. Then she apologizes, saying she's sorry since she promised him a son for Christmas. Carl inquired as to why Sabine's nights were so terrible. She expresses her fear to him. She seems like a cat is following her around, and she feels something sticky against her back. He inquires if she was amusing herself. She agrees to both. He begs her to recall the first time her father struck her. She reminds him that when she was 4 years old she damaged a plate, prompting her father to urge her to go to the small room and remove her clothes. Then he would spank her. While punishing her, she becomes terrified. Her father observes this and spanks her once more. She claims she enjoys it and that any form of humiliation stimulates her. Carl and his wife MSc Professor Sigmund Freud. 2 years later, Carl and Professor Freud talk about Sabina's treatment and how she's doing at a medical university. They also discuss their various psychoanalytic views, despite the fact that Freud offers Carl his own interpretation of his dream in which his objectives are thwarted by his wife's first pregnancy on the street. Carl and Sabine discuss Freud's belief that it is best to follow his path. Carl, on the other hand, refuses to accept this and insists that there must be another way. Carl and Sabine discuss her being the greatest student in medical university, and he assures her that she may become a psychiatrist too. Professor Freud letters to Carl requesting that he look after a doctor called Otto Gross for a while, until he can retrieve it himself. Carl then talks to Otto about his well-being and his doubt about monogamous marriage. At his request, Dr. Gross attempts to get Carl to engage with one of his clients, but Carl refuses. Carl and Sabina are standing by the sea, discussing her lack of personal experience. She then kisses him. Carl reaches Dr. Otto's chamber, which is empty. A note was left for him to appreciate him for looking after him. As well, he instructed him to notify Otto's father that he had died outside Sabine's home. Carl visits Sabina. After he's finished with her, he initiates an affair with her. He returns home to meet his wife, who informs him that she has a surprise for him. Then she takes him inside Sabine's house and shows him a yacht with crimson sails. Carl wants to end his affair with Sabine for the sake of his wife. He was initially hesitant to start contact with her, but she eventually persuades him. Then she inquires about his relationship with his wife in bed and requests that he punish her in a bed outside on the college grounds. Professor Freud and Carl discuss Carl as Freud's rightful heir. Then Carl explains to him about the note Otto left him. Shane Freud apologizes to Carl for forcing him to take Otto, and Professor Freud and Carl disagree on their views and how they apply to psychoanalysis. Then they discuss a report that Carl has taken a patient as his mistress, which Carl denies inside Sabina's home. Carl tells Sabine that they must cease their affair because Professor Freud may have suspected it. Devastated, Sabina attempts to convince him not to leave her, but he does it anyhow. Following Sabina inside Carl's office, breaking down and crying, Sabine arrives and confronts him about how he admitted to her mother that they were having an affair. Then he tells her it's not his fault, which her mother already knew from anonymous letters. He tells her that they can see each other as a doctor and a patient, but nothing else. As her wrath takes over, she grabs a knife and slashes him across the face, and before she goes, she pays the consultation fees of 2,000 francs. Sabina writes a letter to Professor Freud on an important topic. They're both of them. After reading it, he decides to write to Carl asking if he knows who she is. Carl responds by writing that it was the incident that put them together. Then he begs the professor to mediate between them in order to escape disaster. The professor writes Sabine a letter in which he expresses his belief that she and Carl were once close friends, but are no more. Whatever the problem is, they should be able to address it without his involvement. Inside Carl's office, Carl is packing his belongings. When Sabine enters the office, she then inquires as to whether he is discharged from the hospital. Because of her, he responds that he was going to go somewhere else. She informs him that she received a letter from Professor Freud and accuses him of deceiving the professor about their romance. She requests that he compose a letter to Freud in which he tells him the truth. He wonders if she is trying to blackmail him. She then informs him that she had the ability to destroy him, but chose not to, and he accepts quietly to her request. The professor must send her a letter confirming that Carl told him everything. As a result, she informs Carl that she would prefer to see Sigmund Freud as her doctor. Carl confesses his affair with Sabine in a letter to Sigmund Freud. Freud writes Sabine a letter in which he apologizes and expresses his admiration for her method of settling the quarrel she had with Carl on a ship. Carl and Professor Freud are off to America. They are on the ship's deck at night discussing Carl's strange dream and their interpretations of it. However, the professor is unwilling to discuss his dreams with the doctor because a nut threatened his power a few years ago in Switzerland. Sabine joins Carl at his home to discuss her just completed dissertation and their respective theories on attractiveness. She tells him that after she finishes university, she will leave Zurich and will not return. Carl sobs and begs her not to leave, but she insists. Sabine graduates as a psychiatrist 2 years later and meets Professor Freud in Vienna. They're talking about psychoanalysis. She inquires whether he has a disagreement with Carl. He claims he does not. Sabine wants the two to coexist so that psychoanalysis can continue. As Freud begins to trust her more, he asks if she is available to care for one or two of his patients. Carl and Freud correspond for a while before the professor chooses to stop their connection due to Carl's relationship with Sabine and his immoral behavior in Switzerland. Sabine and Emma meet at Carl's residence. Sabine is revealed to be married and pregnant, and Emma tells her that her husband has been ill since he and Professor Freud severed connections. Then she asks Sabine if she can assist him in the garden beside the river. Carl is sitting on a bench when Sabine walks in and takes a seat next to him. He discovers she is married to a doctor named Pabel and that he is not doing well. He then says that he has been having apocalyptic dreams. She tells him she wants to return to Russia with her spouse. Carl discusses his friendship with Freud and their differences. He tells her he hates leaving her, but there is nothing they can do about it. Now, Carl appears to be caught in the past, while Sabine moves on with her husband. This is how our movie. The end. Thanks for watching.